Ora, bem-vindos ao Up&Under, o programa do Fair Play só sobre rugby. Nós normalmente é 15 e 15 dias, mas decidimos nos últimos tempos fazer de semana a semana, mas agora vamos ter paragem de 2, 3 semanas, porque há um tema muito quente que vamos falar hoje. O programa será novamente em inglês, porque temos um convidado especial, que é o AP Cronjé, de Inglaterra, nascido na África do Sul, e que escreve para a SE Heavy Magazine, Heavy World Magazine, e etc. So, from now it's going to be all English, so Andrea can understand this clearly, and there's no traps on it. So today here in Up&Under Fair Place Rugby podcast, I'm here with Andre Pierre Corogne. You know him by Twitter, but he writes for SA Rugby Magazine and Rugby World Magazine and so on. And Victor Ramalho, one of the bosses of Portal do Rugby, the biggest website in South America about rugby, or in Brazil. Victor is very humble, but it's the biggest over there. And the main subject today, it's the news that came out on Wednesday, the United Rugby Championship, which is something completely new, and it's going, on my opinion, going to change how European rugby and South African rugby will work from this moment on. Andre, it was a big news. I think it caught everybody by surprise because the Rainbow Cup was still ongoing and some people were calling it a failure because of the COVID-19 restrictions and so on. But this new competition, if you could describe it in like one word, what would it be? But you can describe many more. But one word, when you saw it, what was the first thing that came to your thought?
Hype, I think, was probably the first one. If I can describe it in one word, I think hype. To have it marketed in the way it did, as you say, I think the announcement that South Africa was going to be in Europe and in the Pro 14 type competition, we all knew that was an open secret. It has been for a very long period of time. But I think that the announcement came sort of out of the blue, left field. I mean, I consider myself pretty, plugged in as a journalist to what's going on, and I didn't know it was coming at all. So it took me by surprise as much as everyone else. And I think that teaser trailer, that first trailer they left with like Jay-Z's public service announcement, it was just sleek. The rebrand was great, and so just really excited, really hyped up. I think that was my experience of it, and I think quite a lot of people's first experience of just the announcement anyway.
Yeah, Victor, you are like Andre. You are very plugged to the rugby world news. You were caught also by surprise. You're happy with this announcement and this new path that rugby that South Africa and Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Italy pathway that they're making now.
Yeah, in fact, this is a discussion that we are discussing this for a long time.
For years,
for many years, that could happen. That the Super Rugby eventually could break into sides because of all the logistical difficulties of keeping South Africans and Australians and New Zealanders playing together, the same calendar. It's too many time zones, too many traveling, etc. So it was really hard for the Super Rugby. And eventually, the pandemics, I think, made that happen a bit soon than we thought, but it happened. And I really like it. The announcement, I think it was nicely marketed. The first thing that appeared in my mind was cool. It was a cool name. I like it, United Rugby. Sounds a bit like Super Rugby, but it's in a different way. So it has a taste. Because I was a bit tired of those leagues called something with a number, so Pro 14, Top 14, etc. This is not something good for leagues because you have to change all the time. If you have some expansion or a detraction, you have to change the names. So and in fact, Pro 14 or Pro 12 wasn't a strong name. It's a very weak name, in fact, in my opinion. So I like it, the idea of United Rugby Championship. I wouldn't use championship because there's too many championships. Rugby Championship, United Rugby Championship, America's Rugby Championship, Rugby Championship. But okay, it's nice. It was a nice brand, I think they come up with.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah. Well, the brand, everybody is happy, I think. So let's try to explain quickly how it works. I can explain a bit, but also Andre and Vitor, so we all know that they know what they're talking about, but they know. The competition will be with teams from Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and Italy and South Africa. Four groups of four. Italy and Scotland will have to share same country, and the two best teams of each group. The first best team of each group passes to the quarterfinals, and the best position teams follows. Right, Victor? Is like this.
Yeah, I'll call it the Tommaso Allen country. Both things.
Andre,
that's not quite. That's sorry to jump in, but that's slightly different. It's a bit complicated, but the pool system only comes into play when we talk about European qualification. So
yes,
the top 8 teams out of the 16. The top teams just on the league ladder go straight into the semi-finals. The quarterfinal semi-finals. It goes quarterfinals. So it's the top 8 will qualify from whatever country they are. Exactly. Where the pool comes into play is when they're qualifying for Europe, which is something I'm sure we'll discuss later on. But that's when the topping your pool becomes important.
Yeah, and I really like the system because, well, in one hand, you have a proper round robin, everybody against everybody playing for the eighth places. So it's much better than the current system. 2 conferences is definitely not nice. We had sometimes recently in the Pro 14 very different conferences, different levels of the teams. So some teams with more points missing the playoffs for teams that had less points. So this is very positive. But in the other hand, I think it's very, very, very good the system, the qualification system for the Champions Cup. First of all, because there could be a chance of seeing 4 South Africans and 4 Irish teams going to the Champions Cup if it were only the top 8 qualifying. So for the Welsh, for the Scottish, for the Italians, it protects them, the qualification system. But also it makes interesting the quarterfinals because you might have teams going to the quarterfinals without already having achieved the qualification for the Champions Cup. So it will also make the playoffs very interesting. So I think it's a very smart system. You do both things. You still keep the countries fight, the teams from the same country fighting each other for the Champions Cup. You protect the Welsh, the Scottish, the Italian clubs that are now not exactly doing well in the Pro 14. So giving them a chance to qualify for the Champions Cup. But you also keep the fight for the top 8 and the quarterfinals very exciting. So I really like the system.
Yeah. It can happen. Then this was my question for Andre. It's not impossible that 3 teams from South Africa pass on to the quarterfinals. Some people are angry with it because it can change the system. But this is, we say in Portuguese, mérito. So it's a merit system. So the best teams fight for the cup. It's not something like rigged. So 2 teams from Wales, 2 teams from Scotland, 2 teams from Ireland get a free pass to the quarterfinals. They have all to fight to get there, and if a group has 3 teams qualified, it's hard, but it can happen. To qualify to the quarterfinals, it's good, in your opinion?
Yeah. So I think.
Oh. He has.
I don't want to spend all the Super Rugby and drawing comparisons because it is its own thing, but and also we wouldn't have a long enough time. But I think something to point out is one of the reasons that the Super Rugby tournament failed is when they went into the pool system where they had loads and loads of pools, and then they had guaranteed quarterfinal spots for whoever would win that pool. So you had a situation where an Australian team that was nowhere in the overall log had an automatic home quarterfinal, and it just completely undermined that meritocracy that you say. So what I think they've done well, and I agree with Victor here, is I think for the URC tournament itself, they maintain that complete meritocracy and that sanctity. That tournament is very much meritocratic. It's the best 8 teams go into the playoffs. It's simple. It's easy to understand. The only intricacy comes with European qualification, and that's almost something which is outside of the tournament. And yeah, again, as you said, I think it's a compromise. As Victor was saying, it does sort of protect the Welsh and Scottish and Italian sides, but some people might say it's protecting the South African sides as well. We have a perception that South Africa's sides are very strong, but they've not really played yet. So we'll see against Benetton where the strength actually is. So all in all, I think it's a very good compromise. It means that geographically you're going to get one Irish side, one South African side, and then one Welsh side, and then obviously either probably, let's be honest, probably a Scottish side in the Champions Cup as well. Which I think I was listening to the CEO of the Pro 14 speaking, and he said, well, that was one of the things that the Champions Cup is sort of about. It is that geographical element as well as being the best of the best. So that's the way he justified it, and I think it's a good compromise.
Yeah, just to illustrate, it's like we had in 2018-19, the Pro 14 season, we had Ospreys finishing the table with 58 points and missing the playoffs. Benetton made the playoffs with 57 points. So yeah, it wasn't a big difference as we had, for example, in the Super Rugby with South Africans doing pretty bad, but it also it's better for the competition when you see the best teams qualifying. In 2017-18, we had Ulster missing the playoffs with 62 points, but Cardiff Blues going to the playoffs with 62. Yeah, 62 going to the the Benetton finished fifth with 55 points, missing the Champions Cup, and Ospreys going to the Champions Cup with 44. So that's another issue. Yeah, but it's a compromise as Andreas said, and I agree with him. It's a good compromise.
Andre, we talked about the image, so how it was communicated to the fans and to everybody. I think it was well made. I think it was a bit of a copy, and a good copy of what was Super Rugby like 5-6 years ago. So a good explanation, good to the basics, clean talk, and so on. What do you think it favors United Rugby Championship in the future as a competition? What do you think? You think it's going to be a big tournament that people will turn their heads on and see it?
So I think that they've been very smart about the way that they've approached the broadcasting. So they've basically decided to do a 3-tiered broadcasting system. So they're going to have some games free to air. So in Ireland and Wales, and I think Scotland potentially has already been confirmed that they're going to have a certain amount of games which are completely free for anybody to watch. They're going to have Premier Sports have confirmed that they'll be the paid broadcaster, and they'll cover all the games in the UK anyway. I'm not sure outside the UK, but they'll cover all the games, and that's a paid subscription service. And then on top of that, they also have a streaming service that they're going to set up. So the reason why it's quite clever that they've got these 3 different ways of access, and particularly interesting is the free-to-air stuff, is because Pro 14 or the Pro Rugby competition, whatever number you want to put after it, has always been sort of the ugly stepsister of rugby. It's been, no one really watches it, doesn't capture the imagination. So what they're doing is they're trying to say to people, hey, look, this is free to watch. Just turn it on, give it a go. It's a complete rebrand. It's a new competition. It's exciting, and I think that really will make a big difference, because ultimately, if you're not a rugby fan, if you're a man on the street that likes other sports, and you're not going to pay to watch rugby, but if it's on and you have the time, you might turn your eyes to it. And ultimately, let's say you're living in England, the Premiership is all behind a paywall. The top 14 in France is all behind a paywall. Super Rugby is all behind a paywall. So if there's club rugby that you can access for free, I think that's a brilliant way of attracting more people to the game. So I actually think that's a very, very smart thing that they're doing with regards to broadcasting.
Yeah, I agree with Andre, and I think another issue that I would like the United Rugby to solve, I don't know how they are dealing with this, is to the broadcast overseas. For example, one of the reasons why Super Rugby is so popular around the world is it's definitely the most popular competition here in Brazil, for example, for people that like, of course, there is a problem of the time zones, so it's always in bad time for us, but it's the competition people like the most. And apart from the level of the game, obviously, is that Super Rugby is shown here at ESPN for like more than 10 years, and Premiership too. The Premiership is in ESPN in Brazil for more than 10 years. In Argentina, I know they show the top 14, French top 14. In Brazil, we don't have it. We only have the finals in French television, but okay. And Pro 14, we don't have it in Brazil, and we don't have. I think they don't have in Argentina too. So it's definitely the least watched league among the 4 major leagues. So let's see how they will tackle this. I think top 14 is not doing the right job. For example, they have the richest league in the world, and they are not that watched. If you look at most of the even if you look at most of the rugby websites around the world, the English-speaking websites, they don't talk much about the top 14. So they are not doing a proper job in terms of making their brand global the way they should, the way they could, because they have the richest league. So I would like to see United Rugby following much more the Super Rugby path in this way, in the way that trying to make it the brand more international, more seen abroad, than the French path that's not doing the right job in showing their product. So let's see. I hope to have ESPN or anyone else showing United Rugby in Brazil. Let's see. And about the question about
I was going to say that I think that the streaming service element of it is one of the things that I think they're hoping to cover that. So it'll be a global streaming service. So the hope is that a rugby fan will be able to watch it, for a price.
But they're assembling it,
So that's the question. Is the streaming going to be for free or in a paywall? You know that?
Yeah, it'll be paid. It'll be a paid streaming service, I'd imagine, but it is global at least.
Yeah, they have it now in Pro 14, but I think it doesn't catch properly the audience abroad, especially because when we're talking about values, they will put in pounds or euros, and this fluctuates a lot. So it's not the best. I think at least one match every round, somewhere more with more exposition, it would be definitely better.
The smart thing, if I can enter this discussion, the smart thing to do for the United Rugby Championship, if they want to build a large set of fans, like in Portugal, Spain, other countries, even Australia, New Zealand, the easiest way was in the first year to be almost free for everybody. So the broadcasters have it for free, so it's easy. I know nothing is free in this world. It's not, and with CVC, who is a major partner in this new league, they have 28% of the commercial rights, and
that's what Major League Rugby is doing. Major League Rugby has a free streaming global, so it's very interesting.
And I think for a first year, it would work to get it out there, to surpass even the Premiership, because, for example, in Portugal or Spain, you can't see the Premiership in the television like you can see in the United Kingdom. And I understand how things are different, but if you want the rugby to grow more as a sport, like football is, or handball, or basketball even, it should be on the broadcaster, because even on our private broadcaster, we don't have Premiership. We have, for example, the Heineken Champions Cup, and Super Rugby went off because Rugby Pass bought the rights, and so they are distributing by their platform. That's my worry with the streaming service, because it's a good idea if it's not so if it's not too much to pay, like 50 euros for me, for most of the people will not buy it. But if it's like 50 euros and works like Netflix, so 10 different people has a signed account, it can.
I think the problem is not being paid or not. I think if people pay many streamings and you keep paying, the problem is to be fragmented. When you fragment what you have to pay, so you have to pay many different things, and so you start to think about not buying everything that is available. So that's the problem. The problem is the fragmentation of the rugby products, not exactly the fact that it's paid or not. People pay, but the problem is that you have to pay 10 streaming. So that's the problem.
Yeah, because if you're a fan, basically, let's say somewhere that isn't a big traditional rugby market, and you don't have terrestrial streaming or screening, so you have to rely on streaming, and then you're going to be faced with a choice. You go, well, okay, I'm willing to spend, let's say, $15 on streaming this. Do I choose to stream Pro 14 or do I choose to stream Super Rugby?
Yeah.
And so you don't want to get into a situation where you're butting heads over it and competing. But I suppose that's just the way that it goes.
It's the market. It's the market.
It is, yeah.
So for the United Rugby Championship, I think they have to sell it better than Super Rugby. It's difficult to go against.
Time zones should help. Time zones should help there, because ultimately, it's for a European audience, which is ultimately where the biggest market is. Really, it's just, I mean,
it's easier.
It is much easier, because ultimately, particularly if you're a sort of I mean, we're all big rugby fans. We'd get up for me, I'd get up at 6 a.m. in the morning to watch New Zealand play. But your typical rugby fans, or people who are sort of fans who enjoy watching it now and then, you're not going to make that effort. Whereas again, if it's sort of consolidated time zones, it makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And imagine what happened with Argentina when they were playing Super Rugby or even the Rugby Championship. When they play in New Zealand, matches are 4 a.m. 4 a.m. is not something acceptable. And Super Rugby never thought about this. They basically try to make always the better time, kickoff time for New Zealand or for Australia, but never thought about Argentina. So they never really reached the full potential of the Argentine public. So and South Africa as well, but South Africa is a little bit better than Argentina in this matter. So I think in South Africa most matches were like 8 or 9 a.m. So 7 a.m. Argentina was always 4 a.m. So that's a big problem.
Yeah.
So the streaming will be a big discussion until it starts, and they promised to develop a good streaming service and so on. But Andre, if you had a concern with the competition, and I think it's bad to go to the negativity from the start, but if you had one concern with it, what would it be?
I think my one concern would be logistically. I'm speaking from a South African perspective. I think one of the good things about the tournament is that it doesn't clash with international windows. But I think that's mostly for the Northern Hemisphere. So there's not been that much talk about how it's going to fit in with the Rugby Championship. And so from a South African point of view, balancing obviously the Currie Cup, which is our domestic rugby tournament, balancing a squad that potentially might need to compete in the Currie Cup at the same time as the URC, at the same time as the European Champions Cup, and then also have an eye managing these players for potentially the Rugby Championship, which is going on at the same time. So it just becomes a bit too condensed and almost too much overlap. So that's a tricky thing that I think the organizers are going to have to try and work out exactly how they reschedule the international calendar around that, and whether they do reschedule the international calendar around that. So that is one concern that I have.
Yeah, I think definitely what Andre is saying is that the major problem for South Africans will be when and how the Rugby Championship will be played. So ideally, they would love to see it during the Six Nations window, but New Zealanders and Australians probably won't like it. So that will be a major question. I think South Africa will have Argentina supporting this changes, because now the Pumas will have 100% squad playing. 100% no, but there are some players in Australia, but like 8% of the squad will be in Europe. So they will also like to see the Rugby Championship move it from August, September to any other moment in the year. So
say the date you want. Come on,
February, March, of course. It's obviously during the Six Nations. Does it work for New Zealand and Australia? I don't know. I don't know if it doesn't work. It's a big discussion, in fact. But Depends on how New Zealand and Australia will manage their new partnership with Japan, for example, if they do a competition with them, and so it could fit. For example, if they play the Japanese teams in some sort of Pacific competition in December and January, so February and March become realistic for the rugby championship, because they won't be in the.
Ultimately, New Zealand needs to chase revenue because the fact is that South Africa walked out of Super Rugby, and with them, they've taken about 60% of the revenue because it is just by far the biggest market. So New Zealand's problem is that, particularly also in an international front, South Africa, as you say, with Argentina's support, it's got a bit of a negotiating position here, and unless New Zealand then courts Japan, which has obviously got a big and lucrative rugby audience. But I think all of this points to the fact that what a lot of people have been saying is that eventually it seems to me logical that they will agree on a global season for rugby. I think the idea of rugby being a winter sport is kind of gone. South Africa's made peace with that, because ultimately the one thing that the hemisphere does give you is different seasons. So, playing rugby in December and January in South Africa is going to be interesting. But I mean, that's what they've sort of done this year as well. With COVID, they had to readjust and realign, and we're playing in the summer in very hot weather anyway. So I think that's what we're going to see. Rugby as a all season sport, at a professional level anyway, players are conditioned in such a way that it's just going to need to be like that logistically. And the Northern Hemisphere isn't going to budge on its season. So I think it as you say, it might be that New Zealand and Australia need to readjust itself. Australia also, but I mean, again, you're also not just competing within the rugby space. So, for example, Australia, where rugby union is like the fourth biggest sport or whatever, if they move it to summer, you're competing with cricket, which is the biggest sport. So, I can imagine that they'd be very, very,
yeah, but on the other hand, I think for Australia might be good, in fact, because they now compete with NRL and AFL, and in terms of domestic sports, Yarr and AFL have even more public than domestic cricket, for example. The problem is to clash with international cricket, so that's a bit different. But okay, it's a discussion they will eventually have, and we'll see. And I think the Japanese market will be determinant in this way. The new Japanese league will start in January, and they will probably have a season from November, because of the national team, going to June in Japan. So maybe that could fit for New Zealand and Australia to play in December, for example, a short competition, to bring money against the Japanese or something like this. So I don't see this as an impossible thing. So this is one problem. Of course, the Rugby Championship's future. I think in 2022 it won't happen. Nothing will change, because in fact South Africa can rest their players because they won't play the Champions Cup. So it's possible before the World Cup happens, nothing will really change in terms of Rugby Championship. After the World Cup, then the discussion will be really important to sort out this scheduling problem. And I think the second issue for South Africa is obviously the Currie Cup. And I would love to see what Andrea has to say about this, because South Africa has a bit of a internal political problem. That is, they benefited the four major franchises, Bulls, Stormers, Sharks, and Lions. And well, the Cheetahs were left out, and all the others, of course, are even in a more complicated position.
You're a Greek fan, aren't you?
I like the Greeks, just because they are like a giant killers in the past, at least. But I think South Africa have to do a very interesting project for the Currie Cup, because it risks, if they have now they'll have the four major teams playing a 9 months season in Europe, so they won't have much time to properly play the other South African teams, and that will have a weight in the South African domestic scene. So I really want to know what South African Rugby will do with the Currie Cup to at least provide a path that is sustainable, economically sustainable for the Cheetahs, for the Griquas, for the Pumas, and etc.
Yeah, I mean that's of course the challenge, and I think it's a massive logistical one, and as you say, it becomes a financial one. I think in the first instance, what we're going to need to see is squad sizes increase as teams move into Europe, and I think that's a logical that's just a logical conclusion, because you might be having teams play. You might have up to basically, let's say, almost maybe 2 teams from South Africa each season playing in the Champions Cup. So you're going to need to increase squad sizes. It's not really debatable, but obviously along with that comes salary caps, and how do you keep it economically sustained? Obviously the revenue which you're going to get from playing in Europe will play a part in that, and then obviously you get the Currie Cup as well. So that in itself, I'm not sure how that's going to provide a financially and sustainable pathway. The Cheetahs, I know, are exploring other potentials to play in Europe. I'm not sure how likely it is that that's going to come off. I think it's ongoing. The hope is that they can find a pathway there, but I can't see it happening. And then I think the other teams are pretty much, a lot of them are helped by SA Rugby effectively handouts and kept up like that. So the problem with South Africa is that they've basically got an enormous talent pool, but just not the resources. I mean, South Africa should be like England, really. With the amount of professional rugby players, you should be able to field 14 fully professional sides and have a completely self-sufficient league. But ultimately, there's just not the revenue, the audience. There's just not enough money, simply put, to be able to do that.
And South Africa is experienced. South African rugby is experienced what South American soccer experienced a couple of decades ago. Until the 1980s, of course, all the best players in Argentina and Brazil played domestically in our clubs, and then the exodus started in the 80s, mostly in the 90s, and in the 2000s we had a full national team playing abroad. So and now it's time to rugby experience the same thing, and now it's South Africa experiencing this. So, but I in terms of what the Cheetahs can do, I think one possible interesting prospect is to have while the 4 major franchises play the United Rugby, if South Africa has a proper league that operates as a minor league, but in parallel to the United Rugby, maybe that league, for the Cheetahs, for the Pumas, for the Griquas, for the Elephants, etc., could provide spots in the Challenge Cup, for example. So maybe that could help. But I really question if the Challenge Cup will bring the necessary revenue to make it properly sustainable for the Cheetahs or whoever qualifies, because you have to travel to Europe to play a competition that most of the French clubs are not really caring about. Some of the English clubs are not exactly caring about. So let's see. Maybe with this expansion of the United Rugby, the Challenge Cup can become even more interesting. So maybe it also flourishes. But let's see. I think one way to try to help the other South African teams is to provide spots for the best teams in the Challenge Cup. Maybe that's a solution.
Yeah, no, that would be a solution, but it's just, I'm not sure if it's one that that they'd go for. I think that the interesting thing is, obviously I've heard talk that CVC was interested in actually buying a stake of SA Rugby itself, which would be very interesting, because ultimately then a lot of interests start to align. If they have stakes in loads of major leagues and national unions as well, then suddenly these types of connections start to become in everybody, or the important decision makers' interest. So it's all just talk at this stage. Obviously, there's nothing really going on. But I think that in the short term, that's also a good cash injection that would it kicks the can down the road, but it does at least solve the problem for the time being, which might be. In New Zealand, they've got the Silver Lakes deal that they're debating for, at the moment. But ultimately, South Africa might not be in as fortunate a position. I think they might have to take the cash, particularly because I don't think there's a country in the world that's been more impacted in a financial sense from this pandemic than South Africa. To use an entire year of international rugby, still not getting. I mean, the cash bonus that you get from hosting the Lions series, to have that effectively taken away. Is really, really disappointing for them. So they've really lost out.
Okay, so we have a question for the two of you. I'll translate to AP Cronjé. Okay, Marcelo is asking if there's like a danger. If it is dangerous for the Scottish, Welsh, and Italian teams to most of them to play in a a level below of the South African teams. I think it's only will work well for everyone because it will bring them up in the long term.
I think the new competition, in fact, probably, well, let's see, but probably will help the Welsh, the Scottish, and the Italians because now if there is no overlap with the international windows, so their teams will have probably their best players. Usually play the Pro 14 without many international players, so it might help them to keep them. And I think it's always positive if you have more good teams in the league. It always helps. So yeah, I don't think it's bad for them. And the bad thing would be to miss the Champions Cup, and it was solved by the new formula. So
yeah. I also think that people shouldn't. I mean, we can talk about the Irish teams because we know that they're very, very strong and they have been for a long time. But the South African teams are an unknown entity, and I'd be hesitant to completely overestimate how good they're going to be, particularly in the first year when they're still coming to grips with a new tournament, a new setup, and a lot of these guys, it's difficult to judge how strong the South African teams really are because they've just spent a year playing each other. So I think, yeah, I wouldn't be so quick to say, oh, the South African teams and the Irish teams are going to be way too strong. I think that that it's actually going to be a really good competition. And I think particularly in the first year, I think that actually there's a couple of South African fans I know who don't watch enough European rugby who think that they're just going to smash it. And unfortunately, I think I've got news for them. And I mean, that's why I think the final against Benetton is going to be interesting. Obviously, everyone expects the Bulls to win, and I think they are the better squad on paper. But I don't think it's going to be a foregone conclusion. Oh, they're gonna walk it. I don't think so. I think it's going to be a really good competitive game. You look at some of the guys that Benetton have as well. It's going to be tight.
Well, for me it works. I wrote a piece about it with some citations from Cronjé's Twitter account. If teams hang around together and start learning the different process, culture, and so on, they're going to develop to something new. It's positive because it's evolution. It's not like what's happening in Aotearoa or Nauru or Trans-Tasman, because Australian and New Zealand like to play against each other. It's a rivalry thing, but in terms of quality of rugby, it can become decay. It's like European monarchies in the 19th century. They just breed with each other, and in the long term they get stale, they get decay, and they don't evolve to something better. And that's the problem with you closing everything, like everything. And what South Africa is doing with these 4 nations up here in Europe, it won't do good for each other. I think it will help more the Europeans than the South Africans because Cronjé, South African World Cup always does well. Historically, they can adapt much quicker than the Irish can adapt to you, or the Scottish, or the Italians, or the Welsh. But it will work wonders in the future. I think it's a good counterpoint. So we have 5 minutes to finish our podcast. So what subject you want to tackle here in the United Rugby Championship, Victor?
No, I think I'm really excited about seeing what will happen with this new league. I'm with Andre in terms of, I know most fans believe South Africans will do well and be the best team.
We'll destroy.
Yeah, but of course it's not right to compare with the Cheetahs and the Kings, especially the Kings. But
but not fair.
Yeah, it's not fair. But the Cheetahs had a mid-table campaigns in.
Well, they reached the playoffs in their first season.
Yeah. But in the third place in their conference, so it wasn't that easy for the Cheetahs, for example. Of course, they weren't the best South African team. It's the 5th South African team in level, but yeah, it shows that probably we'll see the 4 South African teams in the qualifying zones, but the title won't be that simple, that taken. So yeah, it will be interesting. I think in fact probably the South Africans will level with the Irish teams. Maybe will win the competition, but it won't be that easy. And it's good because if you look at the history of the Super Rugby, I think the fact that only 3 times South Africa won the Super Rugby, all of them the Bulls, also wasn't exactly good for South African rugby in terms of for the fans or etc. So having the chance of winning more titles in Europe is also very positive for the South African franchises in terms of marketing, in terms of branding, financial terms. So I think it's more than positive this new competition. And I'm really curious about what will happen with the Rugby Championship after 2023. So let's wait and see how they will solve the world calendar.
AP?
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with everything there. I think the solving that logistical puzzle will be fun for us because we obviously like to get in behind the nitty gritty of rugby. But for your average fan, I just think it's just going to be great to see something new. I think South African fans everyone got bored of Super Rugby. You got bored of having, as a South African fan, speaking from a rugby fan perspective and not taking off my impartial hat, I got bored of watching a competition which was so obviously geared to favour New Zealand and Australia in terms of just particularly Australia, just their pool system being much easier, getting them automatic qualification spots. Just the fact that South Africa would always tour for longer, would always have to go further. Argentina had the worst end of it. Argentina was, it was the Jaguares had the worst end of the stick, and then it was the South African teams, and then it was New Zealand and Australia. So, I was bored of that. I was bored of having to get up at 6 a.m. to watch matches where effectively it wasn't really a contest anymore. I think everyone's crying out for something new. I think, unfortunately, there's a fair bit of bad blood as well between New Zealand and Australia and South Africa, just about how the whole thing ended, which I don't think was very well managed. So I think South African fans have an appetite for something new and something interesting. And also, speaking as someone who lives in England, in London, I can't wait to be able to go and see the South African teams playing in Europe. That's completely new for me to be able to actually go and watch the teams I support. So that's nice.
And just it will be awesome to see the South Africans in the Champions Cup. Then playing against the French, playing against the English teams. That's what makes the deal very good. If it were only to play the United Rugby, maybe that we could still be talking about if it was the right decision or not. But having the Champions Cup from 2022, so that's the big thing, and that will be really important for South Africa, definitely.
Absolutely.
Well, time is up. You can have a 30-second goodbye message if you want to send some ideas so people can think and can reflect upon. Andre, you want to use your 30 seconds of fame?
I got 30 seconds on the clock. No, I just want to say thanks again so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it, and I'd love to come on again at some point. And if anybody's watching and seems to enjoy even 10% of what I say, then my handle's up on the screen if you want to follow me. I'm pretty active on Twitter, talk a lot of nonsense, but sometimes something intelligent as well.
You should follow Andre Pierre Cronjé on Twitter. I think he's not another social media as active as he's on Twitter, but it's very good. Well, a lot of intakes about not only South Africa rugby, but also North Hemisphere and so on. And follow him. Victor, you have 30 seconds of fame, please.
So if anyone wants to follow more about South American rugby, Brazilian rugby, it's Portal do Rugby, of course, on Twitter. It's in Portuguese, so it doesn't help much, but we'll eventually start to do it in English as well. Sometimes it's important. But I think finally, maybe South Africa solved an important puzzle, and now it's the time to see South American solving its own puzzle, because as Andrea said, Jaguars are not anymore in the Super Rugby. So let's see what happens now in this side of the world, in the South Americas, in South America and North America. In fact, how we see new systems evolving in the region to also provide better paths, as the Super Rugby is no more the way it used to be. So South Africa went the right direction. Let's see what Argentina and the whole South American rugby does.
Well, Thank you both for coming to our show. You can follow André Pierre Cronjé on Twitter, and Victor Ramalho writes for Portal do Rugby, which is on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so on. Thank you all for coming. Put a like in our YouTube page and subscribe, and then Facebook follow us. I hope I will. Victor is almost here, living here in Up&Under, and I think he says, Andre, I hope you come again. We have to talk about the Springbok squad that was announced. We have a show to do with you. We're just waiting for our mystery guest who was not available this week to record with us. But follow them, see rugby. If you have any doubts about the United Rugby Championship, go to our website, Fair Play or Portal do Rugby, and you can see what we wrote about it and what are the specs that will shine a new competition. If you want a discussion, a debate, go to André Pierre Cronjé because he talked with you, and you can follow by the system of thread and retweet and so on. Thank you all for coming. This was Up&Under Fair Play podcast. See you next week. Thank you.